You know, when I was a youngster, I used to actually pretend, for some reason, I thought I was left-handed because Jimmy was, but it actually felt more comfortable to air guitar this way. So my first cardboard guitars I would make a Stratocaster, a black and white Stratocaster, because that's what Jimmy had sometimes. Actually, I made a black and white one, then I made a white one, because those were my two favorite Jimmy guitars, the white Strat and the black and white Strat, the Bandit Gypsy Zero black Strat, and the 1970 era guitars, the big headstock. Can you dig it? And also Mark Farner's guitar from Grand Funk Railroad, because that live Grand Funk record, are you kidding me? Are you ready? Listening to it in retrospect, the jams are great, but the sound quality is heinous. But God, I used to rock to that record. Anyway, not that I'm judging. Does that sound like judgment, Elijah? This is a judge-free zone. As I say, I don't judge, I don't hate, but I do it all day long. You know what I'm saying? What? That sounds weird. Listen, we're talking about guitar teachers and my influential guitar teachers. I should start off that when I first started playing guitar, I've talked about a little bit how I got started. I borrowed a guitar from the gal up the street, Sharon Cullen. And I was taught an A chord by, I think, the guy across the street, John Petroff. And then there was another guy by the name of Mark Tyson, who was the older brother of a school buddy of mine. He taught me like, oh man, take a look at my life. And that those first few chords I learned from those gentlemen. I took guitar lessons from a guy named Harry Bauer, who was a client of my dad's. And he taught me but he was more of a bass player, kind of a utility guy that knew a little bit of mandolin, a little bit of banjo, and a little bit of guitar. So he taught me what he could. And then I moved on to a guy named Bob Monagle. And Bob, who I know to this day, actually did the video stuff on a couple of my Hal Leonard DVDs. And he did the video footage. Him and his son shot the video footage on my Vivid Gristle DVD. And Bob Monagle, still to this day, awesome guitar player in the area. But what was great about Bob is that, he's probably, I don't know, maybe 7 years older than I am. So when I was 12, he was 19, and he was going to school at the Wisconsin Conservatory of Music in Milwaukee. Was kind of a jazz haven at the time. It's not quite the same as it was then. It's cool in different ways now, but back then it was a bona fide accredited school where a lot of people came from all over the place to study there. And so Bob was going to school there and knew some jazz stuff, but he was also a Hendrix and Clapton and Stones and Beatles and, all that stuff fanatic as well, which I was. So there'd be days where I'd just show up and I would just say, play Freedom, that Hendrix song. And he would go in and he would teach me the stuff as my skills would allow, but there'd be times where I would just request for him to play songs so I could see it, so I could see what he was doing. So there would be an aspect of the lesson of, yeah, we're definitely working on certain things, and he would write it down. And then I would just yell requests and he would play it. And usually that was like in the times after the lesson where he was like waiting for his next student, and I would say, can you play this and play that? Because I just needed to visualize and also to see that it could be done. Because, when you first start playing, especially like Hendrix stuff, it was almost like they had like this otherworldly quality to it, where it was half skill but half magic. You know what I mean? There was definitely aspects of the blues rock generation, the freedom rock generation, if you will, that, yeah, it was musicianship, but there was magic. Clearly, there was magic involved. And so see him do it was like, oh, okay, well, it can be done by mortal kind, and we're going to get involved with this. So he taught me a bunch of cool stuff, and we'd work on, blues stuff, jazz stuff, rock and roll, mostly rock and roll stuff. But at that time, I was starting to be in jazz band in high school. And after I got done taking lessons from Bob, I remember one summer I took lessons at the Conservatory of Music from this guy named John Zafiro, and I remember him particularly because he had a Gibson Birdland, and I remember salivating over that guitar. But I would take the bus down there in the summertime to the east side of Milwaukee, and I would take lessons from John, and we worked on, I remember Satin Doll and a couple other jazz standards, and I was starting to learn about the modes and so on and so forth. But around senior year in high school, I started taking lessons from a guy named Gary Williams. Gary, again, a guy who still plays around Milwaukee all the time. He was from New York originally, and he had come to Milwaukee because that Conservatory of Music was a happening place in the 70s and the early 80s. So He had gone to school there, met a gal, stayed in Milwaukee, and he taught me a lot more about the modes. And I remember even he wrote out a chart for me of the modes, what they consisted of, what chords you could use them over, and they, all that kind of stuff. And I used that piece of paper for years on end to occasionally remind myself of what was going on. Because when you're a blues rock guy and you just want to know, okay, well, what's the minorish one again? What's the minorish? Oh, Dorian mode. Okay, I can get the Dorian mode because, okay, the Ionian I get. Mixolydian, it's kind of a combination of the blues scale and the major pentatonic. I get that. And then after a while, then I went into school. I went to Stevens Point. Now, for University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. What happened was the summer of my junior year in high school, I got a scholarship from the band director to attend a summer camp in Shell Lake, Wisconsin. They still have it to this day, this jazz camp. And that's where I went and I met Mike Irish, who was I think I've talked about this in my other thing about playing guitar, but Mike Irish was a huge influence on me because he was a jazz instructor that wasn't real dogmatic. You know what I mean by that? I mean, I think I've talked about this in the other video as well. A lot of times, when you brush with jazz instructors, they have a tendency to be very rigid in their adherence to the genre, which I can understand. If you're going to school for jazz, well, then play jazz. I wanted to just know how to play over changes and to know how to write music and be able to read music and to be able to function in my own way and not necessarily be playing, as I've said before, an ES-175 with flat round strings through a polytone amp. That didn't really appeal to me. So he was very cool about being like, hey, you should check out some, he's the one who turned around to Robin Ford and Larry Carlton and so on and so forth. And so after I got out of school, my senior year, you're trying to figure out where to go to school as far as colleges are concerned. And my parents obviously were very, very concerned about, my dad was a lawyer. I'm the youngest of 7 kids. All my older siblings are, professionals in one way, shape, or form or another. None of them really chose the artist path, although my sister Jean was a very good artist, visual artist, and fashion design major. But she ended up working in a retail place, and that was the end of it. That's what she ended up doing. But I was the only one who was going to full on be an artsy, and that terrified one and all. So I was like, well, where are you going to go to college? And what was interesting is that my dad talked to every one of my teachers, saying, tell him how it really is. Don't sugarcoat it. We want to discourage him from this path. So basically my dad was saying to these guys, yeah, your life is hell. So make sure you tell my son how bad your life is, so that he doesn't choose this path. I don't think that's literally what he's doing, but it's kind of what he was doing. So I remember he talked to Gary Williams, and Gary Williams told me, he's like, look, this is a very, very hard life. I remember he told the whole story of, look, I got to do this, this, and this, and this. You never know where your money's coming in. It's hard on your family, yada, yada, yada. And I'm glad that they did, because what I always try to convey to people as well, and he did the same thing to Mike Irish. When I was in college, I got the talk from my college professor, Mike, going, yeah, this is a hard way of life, and then he basically said, your dad wanted me to talk to you. But I'm glad they did, because you need almost, and this is a dicey subject, because everyone's path is different, so you can't really say an overwhelming maxim of it has to be this way. But when you're going into the arts, it's like there can be no other option. And what I mean by that is people go, well, you should have a fallback thing. It's like, to go into this business, you have to be so singular-minded and so stubborn and so sure of it and so absolutely fanatical. And even then, it's almost impossible, right? But unless you have that singularness of vision, it's most likely not going to happen. Does that make sense? So, and I don't mean that, if you suck and say, oh, this is all I want to do, that it's going to work out for you. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that the only way it is going to work out for you is if it's like, this is all I'm going to do, and I'm going to make sure I'm going to do whatever I can to make it happen. And that's what I did. And, my dad talked to all his instructors, and they all shared that information with me. Like, look, this is a tough way of living, and so on and so forth. And I have since given that speech to others, but I do it in a way that's a little different. I remember, a dad coming out with his son. Now, I should say my dad was very, very supportive of my musical activities, but he was not a muso himself. So it's different from a lot of the baby boomers that have their kids that are, young prodigies and got them into the right stuff and took them to concerts and stuff. My dad didn't know. He was a World War II generation guy. So he was into big bands and stuff. He didn't know Jimi Hendrix from Jimmy Crack Corn. You know what I'm saying? So he wasn't like taking me, well, you should really go to this jam, son. It's a good one. You know what I mean? He wasn't saying, hey, you should really check out this guitar or this player, or this record. None of that. He was supportive to an extent to what he could be, but he wasn't telling me, wising me up to this, that, the next thing. So my point is that a lot of the younger guys these days, they've got baby boomer dads who were totally hip to the guitar generation and turning their kids on to this, that, and the next thing. So it's a little different. So I remember I had, one particular dad came out with his son who was really into jazz, right? And he's like, could you talk to my son about, being a musician? And, but his attitude was different. It's like, my son's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Of course, we all think our kids are the greatest thing, so I'm not holding anything against him. And the kid has some skills and has developed into a fine guitar player. But at the time, I remember talking to this kid, and I remember saying, well, what do you want to do? And he's like, well, I just want to play jazz and play jazz for a living. I'm like, well, that's almost an oxymoron, but not that I'm, not as to denigrate the genre, but it's hard. It's hard to make a living playing jazz. That I don't think that is an abrasive statement in any way, shape, or form. So basically, what I said was, it's, as I always say, the path is different for everybody, and I'm not bestowing on this is the way it is and not the way it is. I'm just throwing ideas out there, and the idea that I throw out is that you grow up in an upper middle class background. Sooner or later, you're going to want those things for your kids, right? It's just the way it is. It's like, I grew up this way and this way and this way. Sooner or later, when I have kids, and I'm like, but don't get me wrong, if you want to be a total bohemian and you end up, I said, sooner or later, you're going to meet a gal. And that gal's going to say, I'm totally supportive of your art. And she might be an artist herself. And you guys might embark on this great voyage of being bohemians and living very lean and doing all the things that artists do and living, in a low budget way so that you can develop your art, and it's going to be fantastic. And that well may happen. Chances are it's not going to be the vibe that is going to be happening. What's going to happen is that sooner or later, it's going to be like, we got no money and this sucks, right? Oh, I'm pregnant. We're going to have a kid. Oh, okay. Well, then it turns into a situation where you need to provide, right? You're going to have to do the things that are necessary to provide a livelihood for the family. And that's not mutually exclusive from enjoying being a jazz musician or whatever genre it may be. It's just that you're going to realize you're going to have to do all kinds of different things in order to make what I like to call grown-up money, which is a level of existence that is consistent with middle-class living, which is having a car, is paying rent, is having a house, mortgage payment, insurance, God forbid, retirement. What's that? Maybe going on a vacation here and there, all those different things. And in doing that, there are ways to do it, but I think what happens is, and I'm always careful to say this to people, is that make sure that you find a way to continue to love music, because if you get into a situation where you become bitter because you can't do what you love, and you see as other people having obstacles, or society having obstacles, or people's ignorance having an obstacle to what you what you really want to do, and you get very, very bitter, that sucks, and you want to avoid that like the plague, right? But that's what happens to a lot of musicians. They get so bitter because, oh my God, the world is so unfair. I mean, and I fall into it every now and again too. I just have this brand new band that I want to unleash. I go to my hometown. I do all the promo that's necessary. I go on the radio and talk, and all of a sudden, the first night we played, not so great of a turnout. The people that were there dug it. I enjoyed playing, but if you allow yourself, like, you got to be kidding me. In a metropolitan area of 1 million people, I can't get 300 people through the door? Well, what the hell? But it's like, you can't look at it that way. You have to say, I'm in the moment. I'm enjoying what I do. I get to make a living playing my instrument. It's all good. And that's very, very difficult. So I guess what I'm saying is that, it's different for everybody. And guys tried to give me advice, and they were all good because they all said to a man, they said, look, it's very, very hard. There's times where, it's very, very difficult and it's hard on my family. That being said, I wouldn't do anything any differently. They all said the same thing. And I say the same thing. I mean, there's been ups and downs. I've been extremely fortunate that I've been able to make a decent living playing my instrument, but there's a lot of traveling involved. I've missed, various things of my family, through Skype and cell phones. It eases the pain somewhat, but, and then when I'm home, so there's, what I mean by that is, if someone works a 60-hour work week, a 40 to 60-hour work week every week and gets 3 weeks off of vacation, I'm actually with my kids more than that, because when I'm home for long stretches of time. I'm involved with all their different activities and so on and so forth. That being said, I'm out on the road a point in time where, I do miss things. So there are sacrifices that have to be made, but I would say that all my guitar teachers spoke truth to me, and I made my own decisions based on that truth. There are certain things that I wish I would have listened to earlier on that in retrospect I realize I'll go through my notes that they told me all this shit. They told me all this stuff. But I would say that I was steered correctly by all my teachers. I hope that helps if you're out there listening and ciphering music in general. I hope that is somewhat illuminating. Here at the Wildwood, Ancillary Laird, Gregory Koch out.